Sam Harris nuked his Twitter account. He fully deleted his Twitter account. He left the site. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to why that is. Some people think it's because Elon Musk took it over. We're going to listen to his explanation as to why he left. It's actually not because Elon Musk took it over. So I'm interested in seeing what he has to say here. Sam is an interesting character, man. So Sam Harris, back in the day, he came to prominence with what was called the New Atheist Movement, which was in the wake of the September 11th terror attacks. He wrote a book called The End of Faith. He also wrote another book called Letter to a Christian Nation, where he basically expressed like disdain for organized religion, and he was a very prominent, well-known, outspoken atheist. And then from there, he's had an interesting political journey. He considers himself probably like center-left, and I would argue over time became more and more anti-left in his rhetoric when he was part of what was called the intellectual dark web. And then he had a falling out with all the people in the intellectual dark web also. Brett Weinstein. Was it Weinstein or Weinstein? I don't know. Brett and the other Weinstein/Weinstein brother. He had a falling out with Joe Rogan over COVID stuff. He had a falling out with Dave Rubin because Dave Rubin is just a standard far-right Republican who makes incredibly shitty arguments. And so now he's kind of on an island by himself. And it's been interesting watching his career arc and now how he feels like he's probably alone. Maybe the only person he relates to is Bill Maher, I guess. I'm not sure. So anyway, nuked his Twitter account. Let's see why he did it, and then I'll react in real time.
Well, I deleted my Twitter account the other day, on Thanksgiving, actually. And I've been thinking about doing this for a long time, in fact. It was a very simple decision in the end. I'd been on the platform for 12 years and had tweeted something like 9,000 times. That's about twice a day on average. So I wasn't the most compulsive user of Twitter, but it did punctuate my life far more than it should have. It was the only social media platform I ever used, personally. I don't run the accounts I have for Facebook and Instagram, and I never look at them. Anyway, the long and the short of it is that I just came to believe that my engagement with Twitter was making me a worse person. It really is as simple as that. I have a lot to say about Twitter and about what I think it's doing to society, but I left it because it suddenly became obvious that it was a net negative influence on my life. The most glaring sign of this, and something which I've been concerned about for a few years, is that it was showing me the worst of other people in a way that I began to feel was actually distorting my perception of humanity. I know people have very different experiences on Twitter, and if you're just sharing cute animal videos or giving self-help advice, you probably get nothing but love coming back at you. But when you touch controversial topics regularly, as I do, especially when you're more in the center politically, not tribally aligned with the left or the right, you get an enormous amount of hate and misunderstanding from...
All right, so let me just say right here, if you're on the left or the right, you've also gotten a colossal amount of hate on Twitter. Twitter, I don't know what it is about the culture of Twitter, but it is very snarky and disagreeable, and sometimes it can be really funny and also really interesting, but there is something about Twitter that makes people more shitty to each other, whereas, Crystal has an Instagram, and she shows me whenever she posts anything, it's like nothing but a steady stream of love and adoration. And it's not just like that for her on Instagram. It's apparently like in the nature of Instagram. So I don't know how Twitter became the way it is versus other social media apps, but he's right that there's hate. It's just definitely not for the center alone.
I know there are people who can just ignore everything that's coming back at them. I think Bill Maher and Joe Rogan are both like this. They just never
I do that too, by the way.
Look at their @mentions. But I didn't appear to be that sort of person. I could ignore everything for a time, but I actually wanted to use Twitter to communicate. So I would keep getting sucked back in. I would see someone who appeared sincerely confused about something I said on a podcast, and I'd want to clarify it. And then I would discover for the 1,000th time that it was hopeless. So Twitter for me became like a malignant form of telepathy, where I got to hear the most irrational, contemptuous, sneering thoughts of other people, a dozen or more times a day. But the problem wasn't all the hate being directed at me. The problem was the hate I was beginning to feel. Hate probably isn't the right word. It was more like disgust and despair. Twitter was giving me a very dark view of other people. And the fact that I believed, and still believe, that it's a distorted view wasn't enough to inoculate me against this change in my attitude. Even some of the people who were most committed to attacking me on the platform, I know that my impression of them was distorted by Twitter. I mean, there might be a few exceptions to this, but I believe that very few of my enemies on Twitter are anywhere near as bad as they seem to me on Twitter. There's just no way around it. Twitter was causing me to dislike people I've never met. And it was even causing me to dislike people I actually know. Some of
I sympathize with this part because, yeah, if you're still, however many years he's been on Twitter, if you're still reading the replies, especially given the nature of what he does, anybody who's like a somewhat high-profile political commentator, the amount of hate is going to be astronomical. And some people are trolling on purpose. Some people have genuine disagreements and they want to voice them. Some people have already defined you as the enemy and they're trying to take you down by any means necessary. And of course, some people are nice and kind, but it is going to impact you. And I know that when I stopped sort of religiously reading my replies, my quality of life went fucking through the roof. Because you could have a clear conscience, say what you believe, and then let the chips fall where they may. Now, you know, the difference between me and Sam, and I think he'll get to this, is I make a point of never blocking anybody. I think that since I am some degree of a public figure, that if I say something, you kind of have a right to know if you're interested in what I'm saying. So I made a point of never blocking anybody. I would mute somebody if they annoyed the shit out of me. But again, since I stopped reading replies, there's no need to mute anymore either, right? So in a sense, I sympathize with him because certainly the dynamic he's talking about is real. And there are a lot of people who are up to their eyeballs in this same feeling that he has, that like nothing good is coming out of this. People hate what I say. I'm starting to hate what people say back to me. I'm angry. They're angry. We're just like bathing in our contempt of each other. That there's nothing good about that.
Whom used to be my friends. Rather than say anything about why I was leaving on Twitter, I just deleted my account, which I now realize made my leaving Twitter open to many interpretations. And within a few minutes of deleting my account, I began hearing from people who appeared genuinely worried about me. They saw all the hate I was getting, and they thought it must have driven me from the platform. And several worried I might have been having some kind of mental health crisis. The truth is, when I left Twitter, I wasn't seeing that much hate directed at me because I had blocked so many people. I used to never block people, but when I discovered that the platform had become basically unusable, I installed a browser extension that allowed me to block thousands of haters at once. I had probably blocked 50,000 people on Twitter in my last week on the platform.
Okay, let me just say, I do think that's some bitch shit. You're a public figure. If you say something, people should have a right to know. Just because they're snarky or assholes or trolling or even a piece of shit, who cares, right? So I do think the block sprees are just massively bitch shit. And I do believe that it does cut against the spirit of free speech and free expression. I do, which is why I never block people. I sort of have a principled stance on like, yeah, if I'm a public figure and I say stuff, other people kind of have a right to know. You know what I'm saying? Like if a senator blocked somebody, that's fucked up. I think a court has ruled that like politicians, or certainly at a high level, they can't block people because it's in the public interest for people to know what they're saying. So, and I think that should also apply to public figures.
It was like a digital genocide. I was seeing a especially idiotic or vicious tweet directed at me, and I would block everyone who had liked it. And at the time I thought, well, this is brilliant. Anyone who liked that tweet is by definition beyond reach.
Yeah. There
is no reason why these people ever need to hear from me again. And I certainly don't need to hear from them. And it basically worked. So I wasn't seeing most of the hate that was being directed at me. I was seeing some of it, but it was totally manageable. But then I asked myself, how did I become the sort of person who is blocking people by the thousands who just happened to like a dumb tweet, as though that one moment in their lives proved that all further communication on important issues was impossible? How did I begin to view people as intellectually and morally irredeemable? How did I begin to view myself as totally incapable of communicating effectively, ever, about anything with these people? How did I give up all hope in the power of conversation? Twitter. I've also heard that many people are interpreting my leaving Twitter as an act of protest over what Elon is doing to the platform, in particular his reinstating of Trump. It really wasn't that. I do think Elon made some...
I thought that was why he left too, because the timing was right in alignment.
Bad decisions right out of the gate. And Twitter did get noticeably worse, at least for me. But I'm actually agnostic as to whether he will eventually be able to improve the platform.
I was agnostic originally. I am not agnostic anymore.
I doubt he'll ever solve the problem I was having. But he might make Twitter better for many people. And he might make it a viable business. He certainly has the resources to keep at it, even if advertisers abandoned Twitter for years. So my leaving Twitter wasn't some declaration that I know or think I know that Elon will fail to make Twitter better than it currently is. I have no idea what's going to happen to Twitter. Rather, the lesson I was drawing from Elon was not that he was making Twitter worse by making capricious changes to it. The lesson was how one of the most productive people of my generation was needlessly disrupting his own life and damaging his reputation by his addiction to Twitter. And this has been going on for years. Elon's problem with Twitter is different than mine was because he uses it very differently. He spends most of his time just goofing around. But he is now goofing around in front of 120 million people. So when he's high-fiving anti-Semites and election deniers, or bonding with them over their fake concerns about free speech, he does.
Also, he's been, cuddling up to Ian Miles Chung, and people who don't know about him look into it because, man, is that guy, that's a dark character. He's argued in favor of, getting rid of the age of consent. He's said that babies are attractive. He's openly fascist. And this is somebody, Elon has snuggled up to the worst people on Twitter with the worst politics. And yeah, I mean, Elon is erratic, and he's basically like a 4chan incel teen. That's how he posts. And this is a guy who's the richest guy in the world. And if you thank Twitter for anything, it's yet again destroying this myth of meritocracy. The idea that the cream rises to the top, the smartest people will always do the best. He's kind of being unmasked that in many ways, he's a fucking idiot, right? And on that, it's like, hey, thanks, Twitter.
Doesn't appear to know or care that he's increasing their influence. In many cases, he might not have any idea who these people are. Of course, in others, like with his friend Kanye, he obviously does. There is something quite reckless and socially irresponsible about how Elon behaves on Twitter. And millions of people appear to love it. I should probably address the free speech issue briefly. There's a lot more to say about this, but before I left Twitter, I was noticing that people seemed really confused about what I believe about free speech. And Twitter being Twitter, it proved impossible for me to clear up that confusion.
All right, so before he continues, let me just interject here and say, for a long time, he was one of these people who was big on free speech or free speech absolutism, and that made up the bulk of his commentary on it. And then at some point that shifted a little, and I think he was in favor of Trump being deplatformed. He's in favor of Alex Jones being deplatformed, and, he very famously said he kind of sided, or I don't know if it's fair to say he sided with, he was kind of agnostic or maybe leaning slightly in favor of the New York Post being censored when they released that Hunter Biden laptop information when it was close to the election. He thought it was a responsible thing, given that perhaps this was, Russian misinformation or disinformation or whatever the fuck. And so, his thinking changed on that. And I don't know if he's going to say it didn't change, but certainly my reading of the situation based on his commentary is that it did change. So let's see what he says.
Many seem to think that I used to support free speech unconditionally, like when I was defending cartoonists against Islamist censors and their dupes on the left. But now I somehow don't support it because I supposedly have Trump derangement syndrome. Well, first, I've always acknowledged that there's an interesting debate to be had about the role that social media plays in our society. And I'm not going to resolve that debate here by myself. But the fact is, no one has a constitutional right to be on Twitter. In my view, the logic of the First Amendment runs in the opposite direction. It protects Twitter's new owner, Elon, from compelled speech. The government shouldn't be able to force Elon to put Alex Jones back on the platform, any more than it should be able to force me to put Alex Jones on my podcast.
Yeah, that's not a good comparison, because one of those things, your podcast versus Twitter, one of those things has effectively become the new public square. Whether or not we like it, whether or not we agree with it, whether or not we would have chosen for that to be the case, one of those things has become the new public square. And so the argument for many people, including myself, is that if you regulate Twitter like it's a public utility and expand First Amendment protections, you also can set up a system where when the law is actually broken, you can act on it in a fast way. So, for example, even though I'm in favor of free speech, nobody's in favor, for example, of like child porn being posted all over Twitter, because that's, people are actually breaking a law and they should be held accountable and they should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. Direct threats of violence, clear, sustained harassment, doxing. So if you protect free speech and treat it like a public utility, you also can set up the infrastructure and the framework to, when there is something that's actionable, take action and have a transparent, clear process. And so I don't agree with that comparison. Like, oh, it's like forcing me to have somebody on my podcast if you allow assholes back on Twitter. No, not really. Now, Elon has announced he's going to do like a blanket amnesty for 62,000 people who were banned from Twitter. That I don't necessarily agree with, because of the 62,000, some of those people did direct threats of violence. Some of those people did doxing. Some of those people did libel or slander or clear harassment. And in those instances, when you're actually doing something that's violating the law, then it's like, okay, you shouldn't be back on Twitter, right? Or another thing is the impersonation, which led to libel or slander, right? That's what happened with Milo. Remember when he was going after Leslie Jones? He was retweeting or posting fake things that she didn't say, which were affecting her career negatively. It showed like a screenshot of Leslie Jones going after Jews or something, being massively anti-Semitic. She didn't actually say the thing. So it was impersonating and doing libel in the process, like stuff like that. That's different. That's not protected speech. It's just not. Even in the most pro-free speech country, this country, that's not free speech, right? And so 62,000 people, just blanket amnesty, that does go too far. But even with Elon, you're leaving it up to the whims of a billionaire to determine the public square. And that's a terrible thing to do. I mean, that makes no sense. And then also you see his own biases get involved too, because at the same time, there are these right-wing accounts that are getting unbanned. There are left-wing accounts that are getting banned. There are some accounts that track hate speech that got banned. There were some prominent Antifa accounts that didn't really do anything ban-worthy that got banned. Like he pointed out, Alex Jones, that's another one. Even though he says, oh, I'm in favor of free speech, he's like, well, we're going to keep Alex Jones off the platform, right? So this shouldn't be up to the whims of a billionaire, no matter if you like the billionaire or dislike the billionaire. This is something that's too important for a single person or a group of elites to decide.
Of course, I get that social networks and podcasts are different, but Twitter simply isn't the public square. It is a private platform, and Elon can do whatever he wants with it. If we want to change the laws...
Let's just be clear, that's a libertarian argument. Oh, private corporations do whatever they want, bro. No, within reason. They can't do child labor, right? So then they can't pay less than minimum wage. Why would it be any different when it comes to something like this? Why shouldn't we have reasonable rules and regulations in place to limit the scope of what they can do?
Around that, well, then we have to change the laws. I understand and fully support the political primacy of free speech in America. And I'd like the American standard to be the global norm. That's why I think there shouldn't be laws against Holocaust denial or the expression of any other idiotic idea. And the First Amendment protects this kind of speech, at least in the United States.
So then a good follow-up question for Sam on that one would be, so do you support the removal of the COVID-19 misinformation policy that Twitter had implemented? Do you agree with that? Right? Or is he going to hide behind, oh, it's a public platform, so... Or excuse me, it's a private platform, so you could like do whatever they want. You know, that's what there are many instances where you can say, I will not like the outcome of this policy change, but as a matter of principle, I still think it's the right thing to do. And I don't know what he would say on that. I'd love to ask him that follow-up question. So if you believe in the political necessity of free speech, then what about that COVID-19 misinformation policy? Because there are plenty of people who are dead wrong about that, and they spread things that are factually bullshit. But should they be banned for it? I don't know. Should people be banned for, if, apparently we've decided Sandy Hook conspiracy theories are ban-worthy. What about 9/11 conspiracy theories? What about JFK conspiracy theories, right? Like, you see the problem that we run into here?
But there also shouldn't be a law, in my view, that prevents a digital platform from having a no-Nazis policy in its terms of service.
But then that does contradict the thing you just said, right? And that's fine in the sense that if you have that position, espouse that position, but don't say I believe in political primacy for free speech. But then in the next sentence, that's a contradiction of that. Because this is the test of that principle, right? That's what it is. And because then the question becomes, well, how do you define a Nazi? Like, who's a Nazi? And there's some very clear examples of it. Somebody wearing a swastika armband and doing the Heil Hitler salute and, saying flat out Nazi shit. But then there's also a lot of motherfuckers dog whistling like crazy, right? Do the dog whistles equal the more extreme speech, or do the dog whistles give them enough plausible deniability to say, you're not really a Nazi, you're just, standard asshole Republican, right? Like, I don't think he's grappling with that question well.
Because these platforms need effective moderation and standards of civility to function.
Look, the standards of civility thing, I don't know if that's doable without going full authoritarian. You know what I'm saying? Like, again, it just so happened that Instagram's a lovely, pleasant place where everybody's nice to each other. That seemed to organically happen, right? Or, I don't know, maybe it is because of their content moderation. I genuinely don't know, right? But, like, sometimes when you give people freedom, it gets ugly. And then the question is, do you want to force it to not be ugly, to be beautiful, but in order to do that, you go authoritarian? And that's something he seems conflicted on. Because in his language, he says we shouldn't do that, but then in practice, he's like, we should do that. So
they are businesses started by entrepreneurs, supported by investors who want to make money. They have employees with mortgages. They have to survive on ad revenue or subscriptions or some combination of the two. Without serious moderation, digital platforms become like 4chan, which is nothing more than a digital sewer.
See, that's kind of true, right? It is kind of true. I mean, Gab markets itself as we're the most free speech people, right? And then it did become like Nazi Central. So, again, there's a catch-22 there. The catch-22 is maximum freedom will oftentimes lead to the disgusting sewer, but, in order to make it not a disgusting sewer, you also have to go full authoritarian and mold it and shape it and filter it and do everything, which in practice is kind of gross to get to that desired outcome. So do the ends justify the means or not? Anyway, I'll let this run a little bit longer, then we'll wrap it up.
I'm told that even 4chan has a moderation policy. Hell itself probably has a moderation policy. So-called free speech absolutism is just a fantasy online. Almost no one really holds that position.
All right, we can wrap it up here. But just to respond to that, what he's saying is true. Actual free speech absolutism is not a thing in the sense that nobody will say you have a right to post child pornography. Nobody reasonable will say you have a right to do direct threats of violence. And so that is a restriction on speech, but it's also one that we all view as necessary and fair and reasonable, and it's more of a regulation than just an authoritarian crackdown, So the question is, where do you draw that line? And reasonable people can and will disagree, but I do think with Sam, he's a little confused in that he claims to have one position, but then he espouses something that's a little bit different than the position he originally claimed. You know what I'm saying? But in terms of him leaving Twitter, look, I get it. I understand why he did it. I'm sure a lot of people did it. And I don't know. I guess I don't understand why you can't try to just, I say my piece and then don't read the replies. Like, you want Twitter to be something that it no longer is good for. You want it to be the let's go back and forth type forum. And but it's just not that. It's not good for that. It's good for tweeting out a 30-second clip that you find funny, or saying something pithy as a joke, or making a political point but then getting the fuck out of Dodge. Like that's what it's good for. That's all it's good for. And so if you accept what it is, then it's still useful. But if you don't accept what it is and you keep trying to engage, well, then you'll snap and leave the platform. And that's exactly what happened with him. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal, Kyle, and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.